All right, welcome to the pod. My biggest takeaway from today's episode was, like Paul mentioned in the episode, strategically putting your marriage amongst other relationships of people that you know, love, and trust to naturally allow those conversations that will inform you for the future of your marriage.
Yeah, and what I took away was if we can look at our marriage for the future, not just in the moment, and know that it's forever as we continue to own our outcomes in each area of our lives, that we can keep that at the forefront, that it's forever, not just in the moment, and that we can be better for it. So continue to listen for the full conversation.
All right, so husbands own your outcome. This one's very important to me, and there's been a lot of changes within the last year, and I feel like that I've gone real heavy on this concept of owning my outcome and taking, I want to say, full responsibility, definitely more responsibility, but you know shouldering the accountability of my my ability to be where I want to be in life and in my marriage.
Yeah.
What are your
I,
thoughts off the top?
yeah, I think within this past year, both of us have kind of shifted in some life things, and much less even just this podcast was focusing on our marriage more and having more conversations um, with each other offline, then online, then with our wives, because we've had these conversations, which trickles into all of our relationships. So it's a when you think about it, it's a microcosm of all these different things. But in essence, we are the catalyst of actively trying to make our marriages and our lives better.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, more or less for me, I think once I realized how much my work was affecting my marriage, I realized that I needed to make a change in that arena.
Hmm.
But then there's also the aspect that I wasn't doing as well as I could have been in my marriage, period. Right. Therefore, there was just a lot of moving parts that needed, a push from my end, a lot of realizations. Um, but I think that once I took that leap of faith in my job, well, out of my job into another, more or less,
Right.
and started finding, oh, this is what it's like at a place that feels good to work at. Right, I'm no longer stressed. I feel heard. I feel wanted. It allowed me, I'll say, the brain capacity to open my mind a little bit more into working on my marriage as well. And it made it easier, I guess.
Yeah, we don't always realize how much our vocation affects everything else. Something that we're doing, many hours of the day, uh, we just don't take that into consideration until it shifts and it's something different. Either if it gets worse or if it gets better, you're like, whoa, this is affecting me. Especially if you've been somewhere with longevity,
Hmm.
right? So say you've been somewhere, in my case, like 15 years, and you were there before you got married, and then once you were single, you met your wife, got married, like, so you've transitioned kind of in that space, and you may not have an imagination for what else is out there or what other things look like. So that's just your normal. But then once you step out, you're like, oh, or once you change your perspective, you're like, oh, okay, I can do this better now that I have a different brain space, just like you were
Yeah.
saying.
And now that you said that, it's funny to me because I think I kind of tied my relationship to that job more than the average person might, because as we started dating, I was starting that job,
Mm,
right? Like my hire date was only days before what we deemed our dating anniversary,
gotcha.
which also became our wedding anniversary,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So they were so closely unified. Like I kind of, as I felt successful in getting that job, I started feeling successful in this relationship as well. And I think my mind may have been relating the two of them, right? And
Yeah,
now I think it was difficult for me to want to leave, not really knowing subconsciously I was tying one to the other, maybe thinking even that, wow, if I leave this, is this part going to fall away as well?
yeah. Yeah, maybe that could be tied. I'm not a professional in that area, but it makes sense. That correlation is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So,
And like year after year, I would think, oh yeah, our anniversary is coming up. Oh yeah, my work anniversary is coming up. Like I could never think of one without the other.
mm, yeah,
And honestly, still to this day, I
yeah.
do every September, you know. But yeah, moved on to bigger and better things, man. Um, so let's really deep dive into this topic because it's not only about work, right?
Mhm,
I wanted to talk about this because I knew that if I chose to be better for myself, my marriage would also fall in line, right? And there are a lot of areas in my marriage where maybe I used to try to place blame,
mhm,
where now if I look in the mirror, I can say, you know what? If I were to look at my relationship as a business, right? Obviously, it's not a business. I understand that. So don't come for me in the comments. But if I look at it as a business owner and think to myself, you know what? I had a role in this, in whatever the situation is. It is easier for me to humble myself then and start thinking of solutions, start thinking of changes I can make within myself or within our situation in order to move forward more quickly. Um, and I think, as a business owner, it's a lot easier to do, right? Because if an employee is messing up, I can look in the mirror and say, hey, I hired them. I
mhm.
didn't communicate with them the expectations that I needed to fully. I didn't, in a candorous manner, tell them you're messing up, and I needed to, so all these things.
Right.
So if I bring that to my marriage and I start communicating better, and if my wife does something I don't like, rather than holding it in, I let it be known so we can get it fixed and move forward. Or if my wife comes to me and says, "Hey, I don't like this. You need to change it," and rather than me, getting defensive or deflecting, I actually consider what she's saying
Right.
and, you know, consider my role in what she's saying and think that, yeah, I've got some work to do. Right. Um, I've learned that it allows us to move forward in our relationship a lot faster over problems. Allows us to actually solve the problems,
Mhm.
and our marriage is better for it.
For sure. That was a lot to unpack in just saying that. Um, yeah, I think for me, when you think of it, using the business analogy, I think of being looking at it holistically, looking for the future as well as the present, and putting steps in place and plans in place and like being really strategic. And I know we don't always think about that as far as marriage goes, but um, my wife and I have kind of had a shift just in our teaching, coaching, counseling style is like really emphasize the forever in marriage so that the moments don't feel as grand, right?
Okay.
Because sometimes you can get stuck in like a moment of disagreement or a moment of problem. And in life and anything like that, present moment feels so big and everything is boom right there. But if you just reflect on your life, it's just a bunch of moments, right? So like that moment will pass and then something else will happen, as far as like you'll move on, you'll progress, you'll be better. So if you look back 10 years, you're not in your worst moment of 10 years ago. You're in the betterment of your life right now. So if you take that and apply that to like business strategies into your marriage, you're like, okay, so we'll put up like a strategic plan. How are we going to talk to each other about issues? And then you follow that plan, tweak it if it needs tweaks. If it doesn't work, figure out where it didn't work, how to do it. Because if you're looking at it again from a business aspect, that's what you do. You have a plan, you follow it. If things didn't work for Q1, how are we going to make, or like Q1 last year, how are we going to make Q1 this year better? Right? You're going to grab data in your points. Um, how did we do? What did we do? How can we make it better? You're always trying to progress and be better. And that's what we need to do within our marriages. So, and another thing is when things go not as planned or not how we wanted to, we look in our business, try to exhaust all options to make it better. Right. So in our marriage, that's, we have to take that mind frame. Like if something's not doing, we have to exhaust all options. We have to stop and address it. We can't just continue. Like if your job, you're not gonna, once you find out you're losing money, you're not just like, oh, okay, that's fine, and just keep bleeding money out of out of your business. No, you're like, okay, how do we stop it right now? Like we need to stop. And that's what we need to do in our marriage. If it's us, we need to stop doing it. Um, if it's something that is with our wife, we have to address it in a kind, loving way and figure out how to, the tools that we have as a couple to make it better. So, um, off the top of my head, once you think business, for me, it's holistic strategies and all in, all options out there, and looking for your forever in your marriage, not just in the moment that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got me thinking about a couple different things there. And I really like the thought that, hey, man, this is a forever game, right? And really just snapshotting those moments when you think about it. It's like what I said. My buddy, who has been married a lot longer than us, said, "Bro, that's just a Tuesday." You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just a blip on the timeline, man. Like, once you get past that and put things into perspective, it's insignificant. As long as you're willing to work on it
Right.
and significant, right? Your thoughts can't be, oh, I got to blow everything up because we're arguing right now. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah,
I
for
can't
sure.
live that life. It is
That
not a
that's not it.
right.
Again, yeah, the long game makes you aware.
Mhm.
And sometimes those arguments and those disagreements make you better, because whether things come out in anger or not, I am not a proponent or an advocate for them to come out in anger. But if they do, then things can be addressed.
Mhm.
Obviously, that communication style isn't the healthiest, but I'm trying to positive spin that. But obviously, take the tools to have things come out in a regular conversation. But either way, once they're out, how do we fix them?
Yeah. And you got me thinking about playing roles as well, right? In any business, there are roles that are played from top to bottom. And I think as much as we view our marriages as being equal, we also both have our roles to play, right? So, with that being said, I think being aware of that fact and being, I guess, open to allowing your wife to play the role she needs to play, and then being comfortable in sitting in the role that you need to play, I think has allowed me to make to better make the improvements that I need to make, right? Because think of it this way. So I think this will bring my point together. If I'm a boss in a business, but I'm overreaching or overbearing or um, what do they call it? You know, babysitting. Like over.
Micromanaging.
Yes, every little aspect of everything, even the things that I can't control, you're you would get stuck in a place in your business. You can only grow so far because you're trying to do all the things,
Right.
right? But when you step back and you allow your employees to do what they need to do, you give them trust, and you play your role of affecting the things that you can change and affect, it makes it easier to make any changes that you need to. And I feel the same in my marriage, right? My wife plays her role, I play my role, we complement each other. And by doing that, our marriage moves forward. By doing that and not trying to micromanage every little thing that she's doing, right? I can now focus on myself and, reconcile that, oh man, I need to be better in this area. It allows me the time to do that because I'm now not so worried about what's
Right.
going on, over there. It's allowed me to educate myself further in order to get a new job, right? It's allowed me to really reflect on all the things that I wanted to change and all the things that I've needed to change. How does that strike you, that idea?
No, I think it makes sense thinking of roles. I was more about on the like major corporation level, like in the C-suite, like the CEO, the CFO, the COO, right? They're
Hmm.
all um super important, right? As far as like the ultimate decision makers for said company. But they have the same level of respect. And in those board meetings, they're going to go after what they need to go after to make the company work for their section of the company, right?
Hmm.
And explaining it to the other so that they can understand like the COO is going to get their strategy and communicate to the CFO, which is the finance officer, like we need this money for that. And the CEO is going to be like, well, I have this big vision. So I need you, COO, to organize the strategy. And then the COO needs to explain to the finance officer, this is what I need. And the finance officer is like, well, we need to do this under this budget. And so, you know what I mean? So it's like they're all putting input in, and kind of poking holes, but in a constructive way to get the best out of the ideas that the others need. Um, so that's kind of where I was thinking, but it makes sense if you are in your lane per se, you can help yourself and help your marriage at the same time.
Yeah, that's good. Now, you talked earlier about, strategizing and putting plans in place, right? So let's talk a little bit more about when those plans fail and, maybe you fall to a plan B, plan C, and then talk a little bit about, changing direction because we find that in business as well. Sometimes, A, B, and C kind of all fall in line, but what you really need to do is sometimes just as a whole change direction because the market has shifted or
Right.
it, in marriage, right? Things need to change direction because A, B, and C are taking you down ultimately the same road. But if I were to, I don't know, put this in a better example in marriage, um, I kind of tried to bring this up to my wife the other day. I said, hey, with a pay increase, we're going to have a little extra margin. Would you like to change direction by using that extra margin to put our two youngest kids in daycare? And then, you know, uh, we had a plan for her to wait a few years in order to start trying to develop her career. right? So I was like, do you want to start that process earlier since we'll have a little extra margin now? And she told me no. So we're going to stay on the path. But, I saw the opportunity to change direction that might get us to our goal sooner.
Right. I think it's the beautiful thing about plans, if you have plans that you have that aren't working, right? Um, if you have your um, conversations with your wife, like you said, it was more so you had a goal in mind, and there are multiple goals within your marriage. So for that specific goal, do you want to move it up? And it was just a no. So that means you can shift it to like a different goal, whatever you have. So it's more like if your plans are not working, you can reevaluate and say, is this still a goal that has priority? If it does, then maybe we go to an outside source. Maybe we read a book. Maybe we reach out to a coach or just a married couple that has been married a little bit longer. Something that can give us an outside perspective. Because if your plans are kind of going down the same way, and you want to stick to that specific goal, you'll have to have an outside mind between the two of you. Um, if you run into the fact that maybe this goal has shifted in um, priority, then
Mhm.
maybe you just don't focus on that goal and you just move on to another one. So those are kind of two options. But I think if you are kind of like ABC, not working but same direction, it would help to get an outside source, just to give a fresh perspective, or step back or say, hey, for a month, if we can, we'll just put that to the side and come back. Obviously, if it's number one on the list, then go get an outside source so you can tackle it and move on. But I think those are kind of ways. But I think it's also making sure that you each have a chance to speak on what your plans are, and not just someone coming on the ride for whoever is the plan maker per se. Right?
Right.
You want to make sure you give space, because most of the time those are where the fresh ideas come. The person who is not the initial plan maker may just not speak up. So just make sure you're giving space for that other person to speak too.
Yeah. So, personal question, and you can speak on it however you want. As a husband, and then also as a couple, how often do you find yourself seeking outside source to speak into your marriage?
I don't think it's a For us, I don't think it's a seeking, based on we position ourselves with other couples and it just ends up happening. There's not like a seeking for how often, right? Um,
Okay.
it's more so, and it's not even like us as couples. It may be one of us speaking to someone, and then they just say something and it resonates, right? So I don't think I can put a timetable as far as like we specifically needed to change plans and went to someone for that, because we have enough people that um, things just kind of align and connect, and God kind of just speaks through people, to help us in those situations.
That's what's
Um,
up.
and honestly, for us, it's taking the time to sit down together and be like, let's reevaluate our goals, let's reevaluate what we're doing. And usually in that meeting, or like subsequent couple weeks after that, that's when the fresh ideas start.
Okay. So
So
that to me sounds like part of your strategy, right? Let's situate our relationship in such a manner that just through, the daily course of life, as things are changing for us or we're considering changes, the people that we know, love, and trust are going to be able to see what's happening, hear us talking about what's happening, and automatically be able to have access to speak into what they're seeing and hearing from us, and help guide us if that's something that we want to do. That basically what I heard you say.
yeah, basically.
Cool. That's what's up. And I think that is something that my wife and I need to work on. um, having, I guess, more couples in our life that will allow us to do that, that same thing. Um, while we do talk about our marriage often, I think that it would be best for us to start talking about our marriage together in more scenarios, right?
Yeah.
Just having a conversation with other couples, whether they be, the same, younger, older, um, could definitely provide us a lot of value that we might not necessarily be getting right now,
Hmm.
you know? Because if you think about it, like we have both lost parents, so we don't have that immediate connection there. Um, and I just think that I don't know, we just haven't positioned ourselves yet in order to be able to do that. Now, obviously, we have you guys, but we're talking about different states, and it's with life being
Yeah.
set apart like that. It's hard to just have those conversations naturally. That's more something that we have to be strategic about or intentful about. But um, no, it's just something in the back of my mind. I gotta bring forward and put a plan in place to make that happen.
Yeah, and I'll say, um, a lot of times those moments come in talking about personal growth for yourself or for ourselves, like just walking through life scenarios and whatever topic of conversation it is, something may jump out, like having a conversation with a friend or a husband of another husband and just talking, and then it's like, oh, like he'll say, man, I'm struggling with this, and I'll be like, oh, and then I'll pour into him and I'm like, yeah, I mean, for me too, like, how do you handle it? And then it's not like we sought out to have this marriage conversation. We were just having a conversation, but being open enough to, when someone asks you kind of what's going on, how's everything, you actually tell them, and
Yeah.
not in a way that you're spilling, you know, details, but just saying, hey, like this situation happened. This is what I did. Not like removing your wife from the equation. And then this
Mhm.
was the outcome. And if it was unfavorable, this is what it is. Or, I'm trying to figure out how to support my wife in this that she's facing. Have you ever, how do you usually support your wife when she's going through something? Period. You just say that. And
Mhm.
then generally when you ask people specifically like that, they'll have an answer, because obviously every marriage, every husband is trying to support your wife or support their wives, and sometimes it's hard. So it's more so, you don't have to think about this, as listeners, you know we as husbands don't have to think about this grand moment of opportunity. It's more so just being intentional with your regular conversation, and then it just kind of morphs into getting feedback that you can take. So, but again, this, if we're owning our outcome, right? It's being intentional in all areas. So you can do, what's going on? How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. I'm good. Blah blah blah. No, like if it's someone that you trust, and even someone that you're building trust with,
Right.
to like give a scenario that is, obviously start with the lighter things first so you can kind of continue to build that trust, but just have that conversation. And it can be at your kid's basketball game, it can be, on a quick phone call if you're asking about something else, but just be truthful in the how are you or what's going on. um, and obviously if you need to ask for something specific and it's quick, that's not the time. But make sure that if the time is there, give it. Like if you're at a basketball game, you're stuck for whatever whatever time that is, and just start to have that conversation. Um, yeah,
And that's the hardest part, being open and honest about the things that happen behind closed doors, right? Um, it's taken me some time to be able to do that, but it definitely helps. Um, I don't know that in this moment I could really give you any tips on how to do that, but The number one thing I would say, like Paul said, is just find someone that you trust because it makes it easier.
Yeah, I mean, I would say find something in common, right? The pandemic gives you a good resource or a
Mhm.
good point that everyone has struggled in this time of shifting,
Yeah.
right? So you can, oh, hey, how are you guys, managing the pandemic with the kids? Or how are you guys managing the pandemic, getting everything done? Or, how is, how have you been able to support your wife in the pandemic? I know she's doing a lot. She's working, she's, managing the house. Like how's that working for you guys? Like that's such a broad thing. And honestly, if someone asked me that, like I would feel seen and like valued as a husband, right? Because the way the question is positioned is like, how are you supporting your wife, right? Like, so that's automatically saying, I see that you value your marriage enough to support your wife,
Oh yeah.
right? So when you get that question, it's like, oh, okay, like, and then it's either we're just doing this, and then you just start that conversation. So the pandemic is always a good starting point, I'd say.
Yeah. That works for me, man. Well, we're up on time. So is there anything else you want to bring to the table real quick? Or do you think that'll do?
The only thing I would say is in your conversations, how you can own your outcome is just making sure you're open to your wife giving you feedback, um, whether positive or negative. And like Brian said earlier in the episode, just don't deflect it, but take time. If it hits you a certain way, don't react. And even let her know, like, hey, I don't agree, or that kind of hit me weird. Can I have a few moments to kind of think about that? Or can we reconvene tomorrow at and give a time so that she
Mhm.
knows that she's just not going to be in limbo on how you respond, but just say, hey, and then take that time to think, is there any truth to what she said that you don't agree with? And then bring that back to her. Like say, maybe I don't agree in this, but this is what really hit me. And I'm going to work on whatever that portion is. So that's how you own your stuff. And that's how you get better, to really take feedback and process it, not just deflect it or totally brush it off. So just make sure you're doing that with feedback, especially from your wife, but also trusted friends and um, people that value your life. Um, when they say something that you don't like either, do the same. That's all I got.
Yeah. And take a moment to realize that we all have different perceptions of situations. Therefore, when your wife brings something to you and, like Paul said, it's hitting you in a funky manner, take a moment to step outside of yourself and think how my wife might be perceiving what's happening. Really taking a moment to walk in her shoes, because it might allow you to, for a moment, feel how she's feeling. Or if you kind of flip it on yourself and say, how would I feel in this moment if she were to do what, she's saying that I did? It definitely allows you to look deeper into yourself and own your outcome.